What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over Fatal Attractions as we continue our coverage over the X-Men. Now, as you all know, when it came to Fatal Attractions, it was the first crossover that used all the different X books at that time. Excalibur, X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, X-Force, X-Factor, and also Wolverine. Now, Cable was not used in the actual crossover, but he did have some story arcs that took place between the main storyline of Fatal Attractions. And really, we're at that point right now when it comes to our coverage over this crossover. Like I said, there were some stories that led into Fatal Attractions, but there were a lot of stories that took place between the main storyline of the actual event. Like, for example, Uncanny X-Men 305. Now, this issue is not really special, but I still want to go ahead and cover it just in case anything big down the road comes up that does a callback to this particular chapter. But it's also setting up another chapter down the road for X-Men Unlimited issue number 2. And you see what I mean as we go through today's video. And so as we get into the opening pages for today's video, we actually pick up with a character known as Opal. Now, Opal is the girlfriend to Iceman. And really, if you have seen my earlier videos when it came to our coverage over the X-Men, we had talked about the idea that we're getting very close to the end of the relationship between Iceman and Opal, kind of giving Iceman the chance to meet somebody new and possibly get close to that person. And the reason why I'm saying that because in the opening pages of this book, we actually see some random soldiers trying to attack Opal. Now, luckily for her, Iceman, Rogue, and also Bishop were there to save the day. And so they were able to use their powers to protect Opal, but also take down the guys who were soldiers who were coming after her. Now, those guys, once you had our heroes being able to take them down, they just fell apart. And what I mean by that is their body just turned to flat out goo. And the question is right now, were those characters actually alive at all? Now for Opal, she wants to know what exactly is going on here because her front yard was turned into a war zone. Now for Iceman, he does explain things to his girlfriend by saying, hey, listen, we have been using Cerebro as a way to watch over the world, but we didn't realize that there were a few soldiers who were near your home that were not coming up as humans, but also not coming up as mutants either. And so we wanted some answers. But we also realized they were trying to use you as a way to get to me. Now, for Opal, she realized that Iceman had just basically told her that she was bait. They technically used her as bait to pull those guys out into the open so the X-Men could be able to actually take them down. Now, like I said, we're getting very close to the end of the actual relationship between these two characters because for Opal, she hates the idea of being pulled into this kind of mess. She hates the idea of dating a mutant who's part of a team that's trying to protect the world, and there could be people out there who could try to use her as a way to get to her boyfriend. And so she asked Iceman to just leave, to leave her alone. And so for Bobby, it's kind of like it's him realizing that he could be the end, or he could be at the end of his actual relationship. But now we have to jump over to Storm and also Charles Xavier. Now, currently, they're in Washington, D.C., attending a meeting with all these different politicians who want to sit down and actually talk about the idea of the Magneto Protocol. Now, we're going to learn more about that here in the next few chapters when it comes to Fatal Attractions. But for right now, you have Senator Kelly really want to go ahead and use the protocols against Magneto to bring him down. But you have this ambassador, better known as Louise St. Croix. Now, Louise is going to be not really important for the overall story, but he will give us a character down the road when it comes to another series that I cover called Generation X. And you see what I mean as we get into that book later on in our coverage over the X-Men. But for right now, all you need to know is that for Ambassador Louise, he hates the idea of the American government trying to use the Magneto Protocol against Magneto so early on. You do have Storm, Charles Xavier, and Ambassador Louise go outside to have a conversation. Now, with this section alone, we do get reminded of a few things going on when it comes to Charles Xavier. Let me explain. So we have to remember that for the rest of the world, they don't actually know that Charles Xavier is a mutant. To the rest of the world, he's just a regular human being fighting for the rights of the mutant race. And that's really it. But on top of that, we also get to learn a tad bit more about the mutant underground. Now, really, I should say that we're not going to learn much about the mutant underground. All we know that apparently Ambassador Louise has been working with Charles Xavier when it comes to the mutant underground. Now, we do learn a tad bit more about Ambassador Louise. We do learn the only reason why he began to help out the mutant race because of his wife. They got into a very severe car accident where she's on the verge of death. But with her kind of laying there dying, her mutant ability activated. Now the paramedics, they did arrive, but they didn't want to help her. And the reason why, because the way she looked when her mutant ability had activated. And so unfortunately, she had died. And so ever since that moment for Louise, he realized that he has to go out of his way to help all mutants across the world. And so that is why he joined the Mutant Underground. Now we jump back over to the other X-Men team, Bishop, Iceman, and also Rogue. Now they were able to at least capture one of the soldiers who attacked Opal earlier. Now let's not forget, the other soldiers from earlier, when they were defeated, their bodies began to fall apart and turn into a pile of goo. And so you have our heroes realize that sooner or later, this soldier will be the same thing very soon, a pile of goo. And so they're kind of hoping to get some kind of information out of him, like who he works for, but he is not speaking. Now, unfortunately, they don't have Psylocke, Jean Grey, nor Charles Xavier here to read his mind. But you do have Rogue here. And so you have Rogue touch the body of the soldier, except when she does that, her body's going through a lot of serious pain. It seems like her body is being pulled apart and beginning to fall apart and turning into a pile of goo, like we saw in the earlier parts of this chapter. And so right now is Rogue just fighting for her life. Now, I want to jump over to Charles Xavier and Storm because you have these two characters going over to a warehouse in Washington, D.C. And the reason why, because, well, Charles Xavier got word that there's a task force that was put together by the different countries around the world who want to bring down Magneto. But they were also able to create a special kind of suit that would give someone the ability to sneak up on Magneto if they wanted to. And so now you had this task force wanting to create more of those suits to possibly use against Magneto or to possibly use against the mutant race down the road. And so for Charles Xavier, he said, hey Storm, I want you to break into that warehouse and steal that suit so that we are able to give that suit over to Forge. And then maybe he'll be able to create a different version of the suit for us mutants to actually use. Now for Storm, she does have a huge problem with the idea of stealing. And I will explain why here in a moment, but we have to quickly jump back over to Bishop, Rogue, and also Iceman, because you have Bishop being able to grab Rogue and let her actually absorb some of his powers to kind of help calm her down, but also her powers down as well, so that she will no longer lose her actual body. Now, she does tell both Bishop and Iceman that when she did touch the mind of that guy, she did learn something about him and the other soldiers. They they were actually created. They were not human beings at all, but they also have a name in their head, somebody they have to follow no matter what. And she says Hodge. And we already know it has to be the return of Cameron Hodge, coming soon to give the X-Men more problems down the road. I kind of want to jump back over to Storm and also Charles Xavier as a way to wrap up today's video. Now, earlier I had mentioned the fact that Storm has a problem with the whole idea of stealing from the warehouse. And the reason why, because you have Storm basically tell us that when she was a young girl, she ran into Charles Xavier when she was a thief. Now, she thought that he was an easy target, but he wasn't, because he was even a powerful psychic back then, and he knew that he was being targeted to be pickpocketed by Storm, and so he was able to get his wallet back from her. But ever since that moment, it was kind of like she began to leave the life behind of a thief and try to be a better person. But also, she tells us that being an X-Men is not the idea of stealing. Their main goal is to change the world for the betterment. And so for her, she has a problem with the idea of being an X-Men, but now being forced to steal things from a warehouse. And so Storm saying the one time she'll do it for Charles Xavier, but never again, because she hates the idea of being a thief, but it kind of ruins the idea of what an X-Men stands for. And the book kind of ends on that note, where she is able to give Charles Xavier information that he wanted, but she also tells him that she'll never steal for him again. And if he does ask her again, she will leave the X-Men. But this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.